Mr. President, members, the language on restrictive franchise agreements prohibited on page 24 of the bill contains an unconstitutional provision, and this amendment will get us out of a constitutional problem here. That's the intention of the amendment. I'm read to you Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution, just a small piece of it. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, etc., or pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts. Members, the Minnesota Constitution, our Bill of Rights, Article 1, Section 11, has the same language, and I'm going to read that to you. No bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or any law impairing the obligation of contracts shall be passed. That's what our two constitutions tell us, members. That is exactly what the language in the bill does. Line 24, page 24, lines 27 and 28 says any provision of an existing contract that violates paragraphs A or B is void and unenforceable. In other words, the language will cancel a contract agreement between an employer and an employee, an existing ongoing contract agreement. And that's exactly that obligation that is there, that is canceled by government in this language, is exactly what our federal and state constitutions prohibit, Mr. President. This amendment will take us out of constitutional problem areas and even actually allow this language to go forward without the impending court challenges that would be coming if this is passed into law the way it is. I encourage your support for the amendment. Mr. President, I ask for a roll call on the amendment. Thank you.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'm looking where this amendment applies at the language, and I have to say, so what I'm what I'm hearing is that the U.S. Constitution and our Minnesota Constitution would not allow us, the legislature, to protect Minnesota workers from restrictive franchise agreements in place. We couldn't say that's not okay. You can't do that. I don't think that that's correct. So I guess if that is a legitimate contention, then we'll see in court. Members, I asked for a no vote on this A16 amendment.
Any additional comments before I go to the author? Senator Drazkowski, any last minute comments before we vote?
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess my only comment is, wow. Members, the author of this omnibus bill has said she doesn't care about the Constitution. I'm going to read the article, or I'm going to read it to you again. Shall not pass a law impairing the obligation of contracts. In both constitutions, Mr. President.
Excuse me, Mr. President. I raise a point of order, if I may.
For what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will find the statutory or the rules reference number that I need, but
well, you have to reference it now.
Senator Drazkowski is impugning my motives
okay.
with his comments.
Okay. So, members, I know that sometimes that we get into these things and they get hotly contested, but we cannot stand for a point of order and not cite a rule. I get it. So can we all just take a breath? I'm not going to rule on that. I'm just going to say let's just make sure that we are being thoughtful. Senator Drazkowski has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. So members, the language in the bill says very clearly, it directs that any provision of an existing contract that violates paragraph A or B, and paragraph A or B give directions to restrictions between an employer and an employee in their contract arrangements, is void and unenforceable. We are voiding obligations under existing contracts. It is very clear to me, Mr. President, that both our state and our U.S. constitutions directly prohibit that. And for us to not recognize our federal and our state constitution would be simply legislative malpractice, Mr. President. And I don't want us to engage in legislative malpractice. I'm encouraging members to vote yes on this amendment. It doesn't change or limit the ability of these restrictions that are in the bill to happen going forward under new contracts or amended contracts that are amended between the employer and employee. It simply would get us out of constitutional problems with the language around existing contracts. So I encourage your support for the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I'd like to raise a point of order under Mason's section 122, subdivision 2.
Senator McEwen, you got to wait for me. So you have to say a point of order, and then I'll say state your point.
My apologies,
Okay.
Mr. President.
State your point.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'm doing my best to learn these numbers. Mr. President, I would like to raise a point of order under Mason's section 122, subdivision 2.
Section 122, Section 2 says, no person may indulge in personalities, impugn motives of members, use indecent or profane language, or participate in conduct that disrupts or disturbs the orderly proceedings of the body. Members, I'm not going to rule on it, but that is a gentle reminder for all of us. So this would be an appropriate time just for us to reflect on our actions as we are operating here in our wonderful chamber.